Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. If you could do me a quick favor, see that little subscribe button at the bottom of your screen? Go ahead, click that subscribe button. Really does help our channel grow, our audience grow, and I really do appreciate it more than you know. So click that subscribe button. Appreciate your support. Now, here's the video that you came here for. And I want to go ahead and talk about a program that I've actually been pretty critical of over the last couple months, but I think has quietly, in the shadows of college football, been spectacular over about the last 3 or 4 weeks, and probably isn't getting the credit they deserve. Because the bottom line is, look, every school is covered, hyper aggressively in their local markets, but on a national scale, the story the last week has been Nick Saban in Alabama. First, it's about Nick Saban's legacy. Then it's about who's going to replace Nick Saban. Then, of course, it ultimately became who was going to replace Kalen DeBoer at Washington. And so because of it, everything not related to that has largely fallen under the radar. But I want to give credit again to a guy that I've been critical of over the last couple weeks, and that is Ryan Day at Ohio State. If you listen to this channel, I've kind of gone after Ryan Day pretty hard, went after him after the Michigan loss, went after him after the Missouri debacle in the Cotton Bowl. But I got to give my guy credit where it's due. And one thing about me, listen, I give out opinions and takes and whatever you want to call it, rants, based on the information that we have right now. And I think all of those were justified. But I also am not afraid to pivot and change my opinion when we get new information. And let me just say this. Nothing that happens in January makes anything guaranteed in September, okay? Just because you have a good week or month in January doesn't guarantee a national championship, a Big Ten championship in September, October, November, December. But what I will say, Ryan Day, in my opinion, has done just about every single thing that an Ohio State fan could ask of him since that Cotton Bowl loss. And I got to take a few minutes to just give my guy some credit. So first of all, for people who have not been paying attention, listen, we spent so much time talking about the portal and National Signing Day, which is obviously in late December. But part of what makes any team successful is who do you retain? So obviously early on, Ohio State lost a couple guys to the portal. But more specifically, it's about the guys that could have gone to the NFL draft that all decided to come back, okay? And if you listen to this show, credit where it's due. Joshua Perry, who now works for NBC Sports, played at Ohio State. He came on this podcast, a day or two before the Cotton Bowl. And he kind of hinted, he's like, listen, Marvin Harrison ain't coming back. But just about everybody else might. And that's exactly how it's played out over the last 2 or 3 weeks. NFL draft deadline was on Monday. Here is who at Ohio State has decided not to enter the NFL draft and instead come back. One, Emeka Egbuka, I think, was probably the first really big name to decide to return. This is a guy that last season, 2 seasons ago, the 2021 season, 74 catches, 1,100 yards 2 seasons ago. Now, he was hurt this year, still finished tied for the second most catches, 48 receptions this year, despite missing about 4 or 5 games this year. So this was a guy that coming into the year was a first-round pick. But the combination of, let's be honest, the quarterback play maybe wasn't up to snuff at Ohio State. With injuries, he struggled. So he said, rather than risk it by going into the NFL draft, I'm going to come back. And that is a guy, listen, that receiver room is loaded. Even if he didn't come back with Carnell Tate and Brandon Inniss, and now Bryson Rodgers is out of the portal, and oh, by the way, Jeremiah Smith is coming in. But Emeka Egbuka is an alpha number 1. Credit to Ryan Day for retaining him. Speaking of which, also thought it was worth noting, really important piece of the defense, Denzel Burke, 4th-year player, cornerback, 3rd-year player this year, going to be a 4th-year player next year. Really, really talented player. 24 tackles this year, 9 pass breakups. And again, a guy that, listen, I'm not an NFL draft expert. I don't know if he would have been a late day 1, day 2 type pick, but that's like a day 2 type guy at worst. He ain't making it till, Mr. Irrelevant, okay? This is a guy that was one of the top corners in the Big Ten, really talented player. He decides to return. And then you get the news, Donovan Jackson on the offensive line is returning. That is obviously big news because that is a place that you could argue that Ohio State probably struggled more, but not argue, they did struggle more than most places. And that was a place that you had to retain your guys. And this was a guy that could have gone pro, but instead decided to return. Speaking of could have gone pro and decided to return, I don't think there's a bigger name than JT Tuimoloau And I always trip over that name. So JT, your family, if you're watching, I apologize. But that is a dude that could have gone on the first day of the NFL draft. That is definitely an NFL day one, first round type guy. 2 seasons ago, 11 TFLs, 4 sacks. This year, 7 TFLs, 5 sacks on an even better defense. He decides to return, was a legitimate first round pick. And then another really important piece as Travion Henderson, the leading returning rusher, just under 1,000 yards rushing this year. This kid was phenomenal when he played. Travion Henderson announces that he is going to return. And this was a kid, again, when he was healthy. I mean, we're talking about one of the best players in college football at his position. A guy, again, that, as I just said, a little under 1,000 yards rushing. Just a guy that when he was on the field and he was healthy, he was as good as anybody in college football. I mean, you go back to early in the season and you look at what he was doing, 104 yards against Notre Dame, 102 yards against Wisconsin, 128 yards against Rutgers. The crazy part was the Notre Dame game is when he got hurt and he missed a bunch of games. So he comes back. He has 3 100-yard games in the final 4 regular season games, not at 100%. Now he is going to come back and he is going to be the bell cow of what could be a very potent offense. And oh, by the way, those are just the guys that are returning. How about the guys that are coming in through the portal? And this is the one that I missed. We just missed it last week. There was so much going on. But y'all know the deal. Quinshon Judkins, right after the national championship game, announces that he's going to Ohio State. This is a guy, Quinshon Judkins. This might be my favorite stat of any player in college football. Over the last 2 years, 2,500 yards rushing in the SEC. 1,100 this year, 1,400 last year. He's the first player since Herschel Walker to combine for over 2,500 yards rushing in his first 2 years in the SEC. Anytime you're an SEC back being compared to Herschel Walker, I am here to tell you that is some great company to be in. And it speaks to how good this kid is and what his potential can be in this Ryan Day offense. And obviously, I know they're going through the process of hiring a new offensive coordinator, but the guy is obviously going to align with Ryan Day. Finally, there's Will Howard. And listen, I was critical of the Will Howard commitment when it happened. But what I will say is he's a veteran college quarterback. And the bottom line is, if he's any good at all, and I think he's good. I just don't think he's like that CJ Stroud difference maker. But he's going to have so much talent around him, it might not matter. As long as he's like a step up from Kyle McCord, there's going to be so much talent around him that this is a guy that, I don't think it's hyperbole, could be a Heisman Trophy contender just because he's got 5 or 6 guys you could throw a 5-yard slant to. They could take it 90 yards to the house for a touchdown. So I can't sit here and say, it's obviously, again, we're talking about, as I'm recording here, it's whatever, mid-January. And things are going to change. But there's a couple things that kind of stick in my head right now. As somebody who has been very critical of Ryan Day, as I said to lead this segment, I can only base current judgments on the information that I have right now. And this guy did everything that you could have asked for if you were an Ohio State fan. You could have sat there after the Ohio State lost to Missouri in that bowl game and sat there and said, he could have sat there and said, listen, we went 11-2. We beat Michigan. We're a play or two away. The quarterback that we had wasn't good enough. Like, we're going to be fine. Like, he could have said that. He could have said, we're 11-1. We had the ball with a chance to win the game against the eventual national champions. We played the eventual national champions tougher than the team that played them in the national championship game. And if you want, he could have said that and he could have sold that publicly. But instead, what he sold, and I give him credit, he said, I'm at Ohio State. At Ohio State, going 11-1, losing to the school up north, that isn't good enough. And because of it, we have to be better. And so we're going to do our best to retain the guys that want to be here. Now, if you're a surefire, can't miss top 10 pick, you got to go. But everybody else, we're going to make sure it gets taken care of in NIL, make sure that they can rehab here if they had injuries. And we're going to squad up for 2024. And we're going to go get the best skill position player that was in the portal all offseason in Quinshon Judkins. And the only other thing I'd say about that as I look ahead to 2024 is I do think it's worth noting I do think it's worth noting that the landscape is changing quickly, right? And I'm not even talking about the 12-team playoff and Oregon and Washington coming to the Big Ten, but the landscape is changing from the perspective of who's a legitimate national championship contender. As I'm recording, Michigan still has its head coach, but they obviously have lost their quarterback. All signs point to their head coach not being back next season, which, by the way, did what he came to do, won a national championship, got the school back to the top of college football. If he wants to go to the pros, I'm not going to blame him. He did what he promised he was going to do. But if Michigan doesn't have that guy, no J.J. McCarthy, they're not going to be favored over Ohio State in the Big Ten. Ohio State's got the better team right now on paper, this second, with a head coach who's been there now 5 years. Alabama, by the way, not sure if you heard, new head coach. Yeah, that's true. I know, sounds crazy, but it's true. And so Alabama, who on paper was one of the 2-3 teams that was obviously going to be at the top of the sport next year, they're still going to have a ton of talent, but they're going to be new coach, new scheme, new staff. I mean, this isn't Nick Saban. This isn't like Bob Stoops handing the baton to Lincoln Riley, or frankly, Urban Meyer handing it to Ryan Day. New coach, new style of doing things, new staff, new signals, new this, new that, new terminology, new verbiage. By the way, some of their staff is leaving. You know, Georgia obviously got T-Rob. The point I'm trying to make, you look across the landscape. If you want to say over the last couple of years, in my opinion, you could probably say the 5 most consistent programs, not the best, not this year, but the most consistent programs. I would say Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State, Michigan, Oregon. Well, 2 of those teams are going to have a new head coach. Well, one of them definitely has a new head coach. 2 of them might. And you look at everybody else on paper, Ohio State's as good as any of them. So credit to Ryan Day. We'll see how it all plays out. It does not guarantee anything, but I do think that this team is probably on paper the best team in college football going into 2024, or at the very least in the conversation with Georgia, Oregon. And again, credit to Ryan Day. If you enjoyed this video, you want to do your boy a favor, quick favor, click subscribe, bottom of the screen. Help this audience grow, help this channel grow. We'll talk college football all off season. There is plenty to talk about over these next couple weeks, months, etc. Make sure to subscribe. More college football tomorrow, people.